Well, today we have with us Mr. Eric O'Neill. Eric is an accomplished public speaker, security expert, and author that presents keynotes internationally about espionage and national security, cybersecurity, fraud, corporate diligence and defense, hacking, pursuing one's dreams, and surviving Hollywood. Eric has worked as an FBI counterterrorism and counterintelligence operative, a national security attorney, and as a corporate security consultant. He founded the Georgetown Group, a premier investigative and security services firm. Eric is also the national security strategist for VMware Carbon Black, the leader in next generation endpoint security. In February 2001, Eric helped capture the most notorious spy in United States history, Robert Philip Hansen. In the 3 months preceding Hansen's arrest, Eric was selected to work with the spy within the newly minted Information Assurance Division, created to protect all classified FBI intelligence. Eric was charged with gaining Hansen's trust and then using that relationship to slowly draw the traitor out of deep cover. Eric's investigative skill led to the arrest and ultimate conviction of the master spy. Eric is an honors graduate of Auburn University. He earned his Juris Doctor degree from the George Washington University Law School, also with honors. We present to you today, Eric O'Neill.
Thank you, Felina. So I want to start with a spy story. Robert Hansen has just had the best day of his life. All his kids, are about 7 of them, and assorted grandkids have come to his home in Vienna, Virginia, which is right outside of Washington, D.C., for those of you who are living near where I live. And his best friend has been in town. It's a weekend, it's a Sunday. They go to church together, they have dinner together. And at the end of this wonderful day, he drives his friend to the airport because it's time for his buddy to take a flight back to Europe. Now remember, this is in 2001, February of 2001. And back then, those of you who are old enough to remember will remember that you could actually walk into an airport with your friends and family, go right to the gate through security and watch the plane take off. You know, that last hug just before they got on the plane. The younger people in the audience aren't going to even know what I'm talking about, but that's the way it used to be. And of course, after the events of 9/11, everything changed because attacks that create requirements for security change everything. But on this day, in February 2001, Robert Hansen kicks his buddy off at the curb, waves goodbye, drives off. And his buddy would later remark to the FBI that that was odd. There's foreshadowing right there. It's something us authors do, you know, sort of to set something up to play with later. And on his way home, Robert Hansen stops at a little park called Foxstone Park in Vienna, Virginia. It's a quiet little park. It's about 7 at night at this point. So it's getting dark. It's dark in February at around 7 in the DC area. It's cold also, so his breath is frosting in front of him. He goes to his trunk, pulls something out of the back, and then walks into the small park through a well-trod trail until he reaches a footbridge right in the center of the park. And he stands on that footbridge and he looks around him and makes sure that he's completely alone. No dog walkers, no kids at play. It's too late and it's too cold. And autumn has stripped the leaves from the trees so he can see 360 degrees around him. And when he feels comfortable, he opens his sport coat, he reaches inside, he pulls out a package. It's about that big. It's wrapped in trash bags and packing tape, so it's completely protected from the elements. And he steps off the bridge and he slides it into the superstructure right under the bridge, where it's not going to be seen by a casual observer or some kid at play. And then he gets back on that bridge. He knocks the dirt off his shoes and he smiles to himself because Robert Hansen has just loaded his final drop to the Russians after 22 years of spying against the United States. Think about that. Robert Hansen was going to retire from the FBI in April of 2001 as a 25-year veteran of the FBI with his full pension. He was going to leave the FBI and take a job at a cybersecurity company. And for 22 of those 25 years, for most of his time as an FBI agent, he was Russia's highest placed mole in the intelligence community. And during that time as a spy, he gave us some of the worst information that has been given to a foreign power. Just a few of the things, because I could spend all of my time just talking about the things Hansen did. He gave up information about our nuclear program, where we would fire and what we would do if the Russians fired. And if you remember, he spied for 22 years. That means he began his intelligence gathering and dropping to the Russians back in the time of the Soviet Union. And he survived the collapse of the Soviet Union. So what does that mean? Well, Hansen spied so long that he spied for both the Soviet Union and the Russian Federation. And back in the time of the Soviet Union, that was the Cold War. And that is not when we wanted the Russians to know anything about our nuclear plan. Well, he continued to spy, right? He spied through those 22 years. He gave up undercover operations. He gave up undercover operatives like myself, not me, but people like me who work fully undercover 24/7. He gave up some of the most critical operations that we were running overseas. And we knew we had a mole because things were going wrong. And he also gave up lives. People that could point the finger back and say, hey, we don't know who this guy is, but we know he's in the FBI. He gave them up knowing that back in the time of the Soviet Union, there weren't these big trials. They were taken to a dark room, a gun was put to the back of their head, and they were shot. So he's a pretty bad guy. And he gave up a lot more, but let's move on. Because Hansen wasn't just the most damaging spy in US history. He was our first cyber spy. He was able to do what he did because he stole information from computer systems that were never built within the FBI to defend. He stole that information in a way that the FBI didn't even know that it was being stolen from there. In fact, he would get on task forces and steal from other agencies, just so when the Russians got that information, they would have no idea that it came from within the FBI. And something you need to understand is that he wasn't just the first spy, but he was the first cyber spy. And now, today, we are seeing this surge of cyber attacks because espionage has completely changed. In fact, if you remember nothing else from what I'm going to talk about today, I want you to remember this. There are no hackers. I know it's National Cybersecurity Month. I'm a cybersecurity speaker. I'm a spy hunter, and I'm telling you, there are no hackers. That's a little crazy, right? But get this, there are no hackers. There are only spies. Hacking is nothing more than the necessary evolution of espionage. We live in a connected world. We don't store information on paper anymore. So spies had to evolve. They can't recruit a mole and have them go in and pull out a file folder and steal it and drop it under a bridge. They had to learn how to steal information from computer systems. And as we have placed all of this information into computer systems, data has become the currency of our lives. And so our job in cybersecurity, and every one of us has a job to play in cybersecurity, is to protect that data. So let's think a little bit about some of the attacks and some of the main vectors that these spies are using to steal information from us. Well, first is the password. I mean, 81% of successful attacks use stolen passwords. Isn't that insane? 81%. That means the bad guys aren't even working hard. Why? It's because of the dark web. Let me explain what happens. You might have the most amazing password ever. Here's the example I like to use. It's the first line from your favorite book as a child, backwards. And yes, you memorized that and you put an exclamation point right smack in the middle of it. No one will ever guess that password, but you use it for everything because you spent all that time memorizing it. What happened? The app you use to order your food, the bank that you use to go banking, the Yahoo, remember in 2013 and 14, lost all their usernames and password. Facebook last year, one of the biggest hotel chains, all their usernames and passwords, all of it has been stolen and placed on the dark web, and it's for sale. You can go buy it. You can buy 1,000 passwords for peanuts, usernames and passwords. So if you use that password for everything, someone's just going to buy it and try it. According to the World Economic Forum, right? Get this, the dark web will be the third largest economy next year. That is crazy. And what's happening is that it's created this massive business. Custom malware is bought and sold on the dark web. And so what we've seen is an unprecedented number of attacks. That means that people who live anywhere in the world who need to make some money really quick can sit down if they understand development, software development, and build a brand new malware attack listed on the dark web, on basically the evil eBay, and people can go on there and buy their malware, pay them a bunch of money, and then they move on to the next. Spies are also developing some of the worst attacks ever. And then when they're done, they put it on the dark web, and criminals are buying it and using it. And that's why we've seen such an unprecedented number of ransomware attacks. Did you know, because we're talking to a school, right? So students, don't do this. Your teachers are going to know if you try. You can go on the dark web and you can hire a hacker for hire, to attack your school just to shut it down, like before you had a test. In fact, there was a kid down in Miami who got caught. You will get caught for doing just that. In the first 10 months of last year, and there's been a lot this year, more than 500 schools in the US here faced ransomware attacks. And you guys know all about this, because in 2020, 5 North Carolina districts have already been hit with ransomware, and it's everywhere. Cities have been shut down: Atlanta, Baltimore, right north of me. Municipalities and the court system in Florida have been shut down by ransomware attacks. And right now, we're in a critical pandemic. And that's a huge problem. If a school is shut down by ransomware, if a teacher can't use their computer, you no longer have a school. And that's another point. When we're stressed and when we're in a bad situation, that's when the bad guys attack more than anything. So cybersecurity has never been more important than now, during a crisis where our computers are our windows to the world. So how do most ransomware attacks begin? Aha, well, here you go. It's the second point. We have an email problem. That's right, we have an email problem. Imagine this. Before the pandemic sent us both all scurrying into our homes to hide, kind of like the groundhog, and every couple of weeks you come out and get scared of your shadow and you run back in. I know, maybe it's not the best analogy, because it is important that we protect ourselves. But the fact of the matter is that we were a society of introverts before this made us all forced to be a society of introverts. Let me give you a little test right here. Let's say somebody calls you on your phone and it says unknown name, unknown number. What is the chance, unless you happen to be in sales, that you're going to pick that up? It's like 0.3, right? It's negligible, unless you're just really bored and you want to talk to a telemarketer. So you ignore it and you watch your phone, you wait till it stops, ringing. And then you see if someone leaves a voicemail, because if it's important, they might have left a voicemail. Then you listen to the voicemail. And then you think about whether you're going to reply to that person, whether you're going to call them back, what you're going to do. You have just turned that phone call into an email. That's what emails are. They're efficient, they're fast, they're useful. You don't have to worry about waking someone up across the world when you send an email. Hopefully, when you send an email, you check your work before you send it, right? I get it. But the problem is that we can be fooled in emails, and spies are having a field day using emails as the primary vector of attack to get us. You've heard about the spear phishing email. Well, it turns out that the majority of cyber attacks in the last number of years have come from that spear phishing email. So, we need to really worry about it. And we have to worry about it specifically now as we approach this next presidential election. I mean, it's happening. The last debate was last night. Most of us have already voted, and we're going to see who wins. But both campaigns have already been attacked by spies. Rand came after the Trump campaign, was trying to get into the email accounts of staffers. And we saw about the disinformation campaign that they launched very recently. China, on the other hand, was trying to compromise staff accounts for Biden. And the same Russians who were responsible for the 2016 attacks, remember the last election, were caught going after the campaigns again in 2020. In fact, the Justice Department just indicted 6 Russian GRU, that's the military branch of Russian intelligence, 6 Russian GRU intelligence officers for immense cyber attacks throughout the last decade, which includes the 2016 election attacks. And some of you might remember that some time ago, there was this attack called NotPetya, which came right after a ransomware attack called WannaCry. That attack was launched by these 6 men in their 20s and 30s and cost US businesses $1 billion in losses. It's probably more because, like a lot of businesses don't report to the FBI that they actually were locked by ransomware. Across the world, it's over 10 billion. That's a lot of money that we could have programmed toward a pandemic. So how does this kind of stuff happen? Well, let me give you an example of probably the best spear phishing attack ever. One of the most successful, at least. Not even the cleverest. The chairman of the Hillary Clinton campaign back in 2016 is hanging out in the morning on a Sunday on his phone, like we all do. Come on, you know that when you wake up in the morning, the first thing you do is grab your phone and see what you missed in the 8 hours or 6 hours, if you're like me, or 4 hours, while you were sleeping. Maybe we should have our phones out of our room. That's a whole nother keynote. Anyway, he's on his phone and he's going through it. And he comes across an email that scares the hell out of him. It says, from the Gmail security team, we have blocked an attempt to compromise your account. He looks at it and doesn't quite know what to do. But he reads further in the email and it says, you should change your password immediately. Click here. Right, big red button. Does he click? Who thinks he clicks? Who thinks he doesn't? He doesn't. End of story? No, because then it wouldn't be a story. He doesn't click, but he does what we do in DC when we don't know what to do. He punts. He sends it over to his chief of staff, who sends it over to one of the IT managers for the campaign. The IT manager knows right away, this is a spear phishing email. He shouldn't click. So does that IT manager get in his car, drive to his boss's house, kick in his door, grab the phone out of his hand and smash it on the ground? No, but I would have. I'm a little bit nuts for security, everybody. Does he just pick up his phone and call his boss and say, hey, put your phone down, don't click? No, because that would be too easy, because we're a society of introverts now. What does he do? He sends an email. That's right, let's compound the problem. And it's like one of those game of telephone that you played as a kid. The email goes back to the chief of staff, then goes to an assistant, then goes to this guy who's running this important campaign. He sees it, and the email says, this is a legitimate email. That was enough for him. He clicks the link. He goes to a dummy website. He puts in his username. He puts in his password. He puts the password he would have liked to change it to. And he gives Russia, these 6 GRU intelligence officers who were just indicted by the FBI, 30,000 of his emails. Now, they weren't just going after him. They were going after staffers on both campaigns. They got 60,000 emails total that they curated and dumped on WikiLeaks. And the rest literally is history. So one email can change everything. 23% of people click on these email links, 23%. So if 4 of you are in a room, if 4 of you ever are in a room again, if you look left, one of your buddies is going to click on that spear phishing email no matter what we do. So we need technology to protect ourselves. That's why your cybersecurity people are so critical. And it's even higher. This threat is higher today, right now, today. We're in a pandemic. We're all under stress. We're working from home. And often we're working on personal devices that are not built for security. Like if you talk to a cybersecurity company, they're going to say, you should be on the device that comes from your company, and you should never do work on your personal device, and you should have a separate router that's just for work. Like, how many people are going to do that? I mean, it's not the easiest thing to do. So we need to be more careful. But our guard is down because we're fighting a war against this pandemic. And so what's happening? The cyber spies, the cyber criminals, and the cyber terrorists, yes, are using the crisis as cover to launch these attacks that are mercilessly coming after us. And they're doing it when we least expect it, because bad guys stay one step ahead of security. And they've been doing it forever. As we try and learn about what they're doing, as we stop attacks, they come right back after us. So what can you do? I mean, what can you do to save your company or to save your school? Well, you already know that ransom attacks can be a huge problem, and ransom attacks tend to start through these spear phishing attacks. And they cost a lot of money to deal with. Cybercrime damage costs, right, predicted by next year are going to be around $6 trillion. That's $6 trillion that we could be using to deal with this pandemic. Instead, we're going to be paying it to some kid sitting in a former Russian stan who decided that instead of getting a legitimate job, it would be better to launch ransomware attacks. Did you know that, by the way, statistically, coming out of school in Eastern Europe with a software development degree, you can make like 30, 40 grand. If you get out of school and you jump right into developing ransomware and selling it on the dark web, you can make over $100,000 right out of school. Guys, don't think about doing this because you do get caught here and there, but that money is tax-free. That's what we're up against. So we need to act, not react to the threat. We need to hunt the threat before that threat hunts us. That's right. You are all spy hunters. Every single one of us has a part to play in cybersecurity. And I'm not just saying that because it's National Cybersecurity Month. Every single day is National Cybersecurity Day. Because if we all aren't working in lock and step to solve this problem, it's never going to get solved. So what can you do? Well, here are some basic things you can do, right? Because if you're not doing these basic things, it's over. So everyone do these basic things. First of all, keep your eyes open. If you get a bad feeling about something, what I call that cop instinct, it's what we had to develop in the FBI, report it. If you see that email that you think might be spear phishing, find out how you can report it to the IT at your school. Be a custodian of data. Take care not to inadvertently disclose data. It's bad enough when you get tricked by a spy. It's worse when you accidentally throw it out there. And this is happening a lot during the pandemic. I'm seeing a lot of people and a lot of companies who are reporting that one of their people just accidentally sent a confidential file to the wrong party. You know, you want to send to Eric O'Neill, ERIC, and you just quickly hit, okay, there you go, send. But you didn't send it to me. You sent it to a different Eric. That happens. Email security. Remember the chairman of the Hillary Clinton campaign in 2016? What were his two huge problems? One, he's using his Gmail system to do all of his work. That's nuts. Now, I love Gmail. I use it for my public speaking, but when I'm doing work for a client, I'm using my extremely secure email account under my business that uses encryption and everything else. And even when I use my Gmail account, I have two-factor encryption turned on, two-factor authentication. If the chairman of that campaign had 2FA turned on, and remember, that's where you log into your account and it sends a text, it's one of the ways, to your phone, and then you enter that code, and then you can get in your account, that second step. If he had that turned on, Russians would not have gotten his information. Now, there is a way, if they really come after you, that they can trick you there too, but it makes it so much harder. So have that turned on. And by the way, not just your email, in your bank, in all your social media accounts. Social media right now is a massive vector for attack, especially when we're stuck at home. And that's how we're connecting with our friends. And now that we're stuck at home, by the way, be just as careful at home as you are in the office. Now, here's a special one for students, all right? Couple of things here. And they might surprise you. When you're not using it, cover your webcam. I'm serious, cover your webcam. You see, a lot of us in security, we got a piece of tape over our webcams on our laptops. There's a reason for that. Some malware will turn your webcam on. It'll transmit back to the attacker, and it'll record everything, but it'll make sure that that little light is off. So if you've been hit, Someone might be watching. So just keep the cover on just in case. Here's another one. Since we're doing a lot of our classes in virtual meetings, don't click on links that come from virtual meetings unless they're from somebody that is a host or a panelist. Because people sneak into meetings. You've heard of Zoom bombing, where people just learn about a meeting or they find a link and they jump in because there's no password. People sneak into meetings. Sometimes they get on there and they cause a big ruckus and they're very obnoxious. Sometimes they don't say a word, but what they'll do is they'll see links in the meetings to get you to click, and you trust it because you're sitting in the meeting. And here's another thing: never share your confidential information online. We're in an online world. People will try to trick you. Couple of the worst tricks I've seen in the last month. One is you get an email saying, "We've received your ballot, but there's a problem. Click here so that we can walk you through how to secure your ballot and make sure that you have your vote." That's a scary one. And they're pretty good at the backgrounds look good. It's not blurry, good grammar. It looks like it comes from, in my case, the Maryland Election Commission. Be very careful about those. Another one is reserve your spot in line for the vaccine. Yeah, exactly. And people go onto this website and they enter their name and their birth date and their social security number and all the information that now an attacker can use to completely steal your identity. People will try to trick you. The spies are out there. So we have to be vigilant and we have to be careful. Remember, Cyber Security Awareness Month is not just in October. It's every single day. Because there are no hackers, there are only spies, and that is who is coming after you. So with that, I thought I would close, and we will take some questions after I'm done speaking. So please write down what you want to ask or throw it in the chat or the Q&A box. But I want to close with how we caught Robert Hansen, because we did catch him. I mean, they locked me in a room with Robert Hansen. The FBI knew that this might be the spy because they recruited a source, and that source handed over a file of information. It was like a crazy game of Clue, right? We received from this source, this Russian source, one of these old KGB intelligence officers who years ago, when the collapse of the Soviet Union happened and the reformation into the Russian Federation, which was supposed to make them more democratic, happened, he stole a file from a file cabinet deep in Moscow's intelligence community and hid it in his attic for a rainy day. And this was the rainy day. After he'd already finished business and wanted to retire, sold it for millions of dollars and guaranteed college for his kids, retired somewhere warm in the US, and he's gone. FBI opens this file they spent all this money and all this time getting. And it's like the worst game of Clue. You open it up and there's a cassette tape, some letters, and a trash bag. And they had to solve the case of the worst spy, the worst mole ever in the US intelligence community with just those 3 items. Well, the letters were signed by the name of the spy, and he was known as Ramon Garcia, which was Hansen's sexy spy name. I mean, he didn't want to go down in history with a lame spy name, so he chose that one for himself. The letters were also written in a way that kind of led back to this oddball that worked in the FBI. They could listen to the tape, and when they listened to the cassette tape, it was Hansen's voice calling the Russians to say, "Where the hell is my money?" See, he had gone and lifted the wrong side of the platform where they left $50,000 for him. So he called to ask where it was. And finally, the trash bags. Those trash bags he used to wrap his drop of secrets that he would put under that bridge in Foxstone Park. The Russians couldn't run prints, but the FBI could. And we had enough circumstantial evidence to build an investigation against Robert Hansen, which dropped jaws and stomachs throughout the small team that was involved in trying to catch him. Because it turns out that Hansen wasn't just the worst spy in US history. He was the FBI's top Russian analyst. And in fact, they'd asked him at one point to help them catch the spy they knew was in the intelligence community. The best place to be in a spy, asked to catch yourself. And Hansen was laughing it up for years and years. But now we had him. We still had to catch him. So they built a new office at the FBI headquarters, the information assurance section. They threw Hansen in there and put him in charge of it, building cybersecurity for the FBI. And looked around the FBI and they found the only other guy apparently that knew how to turn on a computer and knew how to hunt spies. And that was this guy. They threw me in the office with him, shook it up, and hoped I came out all right. And I did. See, bad guys have routines. They have clues, things they do to protect information. When you're a spy hunter, you look for those things. Robert Hansen had, remember, this is 2001, a Palm Pilot. Not this Palm Pilot. This is the Palm Pilot that they used in the movie Breach. Yes, I got to keep it, but one just like this, a Palm 3X. Now, for those of you who were born after 1980, right? A Palm Pilot was this device that you used to use, and you use this thing called a stylus, which, by the way, isn't smart at all. It's just a piece of plastic, and you would tap, 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 and after like a half hour, you finally had your Outlook invitation or your Outlook record plugged in there. It basically was a digital calendar, and it probably wasn't as good as just using a notepad, but you know what? It was the new cool thing, and people had them, and Hansen loved his. He kept his in his left back pocket. And every time he sat down, he pulled it out of his pocket and put it in his bag. And when he stood up like clockwork, he grabbed it and put it right back in his pocket over and over and over and over again. Amazing, right? And so, I said, well, what is it about that Palm Pilot? And he looked at me and he said, to be an executive, you need to have a device like this. You have to be able to organize your life. And it's the greatest device ever made. He truly believed that. So I said, we got to get it away from him. So here's how we did it. I waited till we were sitting down, so it was in his bag. And I set up this operation where an assistant director was read into the case. He comes in unannounced and bam, he slams $20 on Hansen's desk. He says, you and me, the shooting range now, and I bet you that 20, 5 targets out of 5, I could beat you. And Hansen goes, I'm much too busy. I don't have time now. We're gonna have to do it later. And the ATEC leans over the desk and looks at him and says, Bob, that wasn't a request. And Hansen's angry. And when we're angry and when we're stressed, we make bad decisions. And that's what I wanted. I used everything I knew about him, my psych profile. He didn't like anyone above him in the chain of authority. He didn't like to be interrupted or challenged, but he really, really likes to shoot. So he grumbles to his feet, and he grabs his ear protection and eye protection. He holsters his firearm, makes sure he has ammunition, and he trudges off after this guy down to the shooting range. And I'm excited because for the first time, he left that Palm Pilot behind. And I waited till he got down there, and I got a text on my SkyTel alphanumeric two-way pager, texting before there was texting. And it says, in pocket shooting. I run to his bag, go through all 4 pockets. They're all identical. And I find the Palm Pilot, I find a floppy disk, and I find a data card. I take all 3. They have data. Great. We'll get it all. Run down 3 flights of steps. Hand them off to a tech team. They've been waiting weeks, by the way. I finally got it right. And they start to copy it. They say, it's all encrypted. We'll just copy it 1-to-1. We'll break the encryption later. And I said, you can do that? They said, we're the FBI. I said, all right, go do it. Now you can see that I never stop moving. I mean, I speak standing up just so I can never stop moving. So they threw me out of the room because I'm making them nervous. So now I'm waiting in the hall and I get another text. And it says, don't know what happened. Out of pocket, probably coming to you. Apparently, because I've seen the tape, he set up his target. He ran it down the range, pulled out his firearm. He shot a few times, stopped, brought his target back, looked at it, holstered his firearm, and abruptly left because he realized he didn't have his Palm Pilot. So I knock on the door and I'm like, guys, I'm going to need those devices. They hand them to me and I run 3 flights of steps, get into the office, get to his bag, look at the bag and realize 3 devices, 4 pockets, and I have no clue. And as I'm trying to cast back in my mind and remember, I hear him coming through the door. So I just dropped them all, 1, 2, 3, 4, zipped up all the pockets, 3 devices, and best guess, kind of like when you're taking a test and you just circle a C on the Scantron because it's more likely than not to be the correct answer. It was like that. Ran to my desk and put the best poker face I've ever had. He comes through the main door, glares at me on his way into his office, slams his door, and I hear zip. And I started to think, why am I still sitting at my desk? The safe thing to do is run down the hall. Get out of here. He's armed. I'm not. And he's angry. But I sat there because I knew that if I wasn't there when he came out, this case was over. He would take his open ticket to Moscow and his fake passport that the Russians had given him in one of those drops. Yeah, I found that too. And he'd be gone. Right now, he'd be roommates with Edward Snowden, hanging out. So I stayed there, thinking up what excuse I would use, because there was no way I got those pockets right. I mean, the odds are impossible. You don't go to Vegas with those odds. He comes out of his office, comes right to my desk, and he leans over it. He looks at me, and he says, "Were you in my office?" Yeah. Best poker face ever. Best ever. Never had another one like this. I just looked back to him. I said, "Yeah, I was in your office. I put a memo in your inbox. Didn't you see it?" He looks at me. He just looks at me, waiting to see if I crack. And I don't. Because right here, I'm looking good. But back here, I'm sweating all down my shirt. I mean, I had to change my shirt. It was so bad. Then he says, "I don't want you in my office again." Turns around and he leaves for the day. A few days later, right? A few days later, he's on that bridge. And he's just loaded his final drop to the Russians. He's feeling good. After a career as their top spy, he's loaded his final drop. And he retraces his steps back along that old trail. He reaches his car, this battered old Ford Taurus, silver, pulls his keys out. Two vans screech to a halt. The SWAT teams jump out. They raise their weapons. He raises his hands. And he says, "The guns are not necessary." And then he says, "What took you so long?" They arrest him, and he is charged with espionage, numerous counts of espionage, for giving up some of the worst information that has ever been given to a foreign government, for using a known drop site, and for causing the death of all of our assets in Russia during the most critical time of the Cold War, 1984 and 85. He pleads guilty, and he will spend the rest of his life in Florence, Colorado, with no chance for parole. So how did we catch him? Well, when he walked up on that bridge, and he stood there thinking that he was safe and thinking he was alone, and he smiled to himself, there were assets like me, undercover operatives, surrounding him, wearing camouflage, recording his every move, recording him loading a drop at a known drop site to the Russians. How do we know where he'd be and when? Because that Palm Pilot, when we decrypted it, is a calendar. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how you catch a spy. Thank you very much. Now we have time for as many questions and answers as you guys can ask and I can answer in the little bit of time we have left.
Eric, thank you very much. Your story is absolutely fascinating, and your insights on cybersecurity are really, really needed right now in this landscape. I want to kick off the question and answers portion by asking the big question: why did Hansen spy against the United States, and what motivates a person to become a spy?
Right. That is a great question, Mark, or whoever asked it. Yeah, what motivates people to spy? I mean, what motivates a person to betray? We are fascinated with that question, and we have been in security forever. I mean, since the first spies in history, and spying is, you know, the old joke, the second oldest profession. So look, espionage, right? What motivates a spy? What motivated Hansen? Well, here's the short answer. No one really knows, because the only question he has ever refused to answer in all of the years that he's been interrogated is why he did it. Now, he told them everything he did, and he is now known or I said in my book, Gray Day, he's the modern architect of the FBI, because by correcting everything he did, they fixed a lot of the problems in the FBI. But he never said why he did it. Here's the thing. I think I know. I think I know. Because I spent 8 hours a day for months and months just talking to him and getting very close to the answer. Here's why. He started with the FBI pretty young, and he wanted to be James Bond. Now, I'm not saying that to be funny. He literally wanted to be James Bond. He was a James Bond fan. He had a Leica camera. He had a Walter PPK. He knew every single movie, chapter and verse. We talked about the Bond movies all the time. It was like one of those things that we had in common. Yeah, I like Bond too. And he wasn't made James Bond. He wanted to go in operations and hunt Russians. Instead, he was put in a room and to analyze information, because that's what he was good at. And analysts are the bread and butter of intelligence. Without analysts, people like me, who were the field operatives, couldn't do a thing, because we'd have no actionable data to pursue. But he was mad. He wanted to be James Bond, and he thought the FBI made him a librarian. Now, at the same time, he needed money. He'd married up, he was having kids, he was living above his means, and he was living right outside of New York City. He was at the New York field office, and that's a real expensive place to be. So he had a need for money, and he had that triggering event. He was angry at the FBI. And you need those things, right? The third thing you need is a capacity to spy. He was seeing all of the Russian intelligence. He was the top analyst against Russia. And he thought he knew how to get away with it. He was right. The Russians never knew who he was. Never, the entire time. Not until we arrested him did they know the name Robert Hansen. And he made it that way. He called all the shots for his entire career as a spy, and that is why he survived so long. So yeah, he did it for the money, but he also did it because he was angry. And then as he continued to spy, spying is what made him feel belonged to something much bigger than he was. It was the thing that he did best in the world. He was the best spy. He was the most successful spy in US history as far as the amount of damage he did. And that's kind of hard to give up, because it became part of his identity. That's why he was spying.
Thanks, Eric. The next question we have is from Glenn Hesse. He asks, do you see the threat landscape shifting from primarily phishing? And if so, where do you see it moving to?
That is a really great question. Yes, it is shifting. So there are a couple of things that it's shifting to. So phishing is still number one. Bad guys will continue to do what they can do as long as it continues to work. So until we can stop them doing it, they're going to continue spear phishing. Now, why is spear phishing so successful? If there are no hackers, there are only spies, and hacking is just the necessary evolution of espionage. If we think of hacking as espionage, well, that's what they're doing. They're fooling a person. They're not breaking into a computer. So sometimes what we're seeing, this evolution of successful attacks, are a few other things. Non-malware attacks. So attacking vulnerabilities in systems. There were an immense number of attacks in the last year against government agencies who were slow to patch. So what happens is cybersecurity says, hey, you're vulnerable if you're doing this, right? And the attackers go and they attack everywhere they can to try to exploit the vulnerability before the organization or the person or the government agency patches to secure the vulnerability. So there's that. There is also what we call island hopping. And I think island hopping is already, but it's going to be the next big vector of attack. Now, when I talk about island hopping is you're pretty secure. You protect yourself, you're smart, you don't click on those links, you don't open those attachments, you change your password all the time, or you use a good password manager, you have two-factor authentication turned on, you're using best-in-brand cybersecurity. So they don't attack you, they attack you through someone that you've let into your circle of trust. Usually somebody else who has access to a node, for example, in your secure environment. It can be a vendor, it can be somebody else, it can be somebody who just has access, a consultant, something like that if we're talking about businesses. So island hopping is happening all the time. And we're seeing this really successfully with ransomware attackers, especially these attackers that have now been called the big game hunters, because they go after cities and municipalities, those kind of things. And what they do is they attack one person or one computer system or one organization, and they lay in wait quietly and try to move laterally and island hop until they have a critical mass of systems and then bring it all down at once. This is those of us who are thinking of like horrible future problems, right? This is how we think that perhaps there could be a critical infrastructure attack. It's really the only way. You would have to collect a large number of systems and lurk quietly without being seen in order to bring down, for example, even a small portion of the US power grid. And where we're doing sort of futurist cybersecurity theory, these are the kind of things that we're trying to think about and plan for.
Excellent. I want to remind all the attendees that if you have a question, you can either throw it in the chat, you can ask it in the Q&A, or you can raise your hand and either Felina or I will allow you to speak if you want to ask it live. The next question comes from Jason Gerd. He asked, if you had a limited budget, what one security tool would you suggest to give you the maximum coverage?
Right. So if you are a company or if you are an organization or you're looking at sort of like enterprise level security, all your systems, endpoint. You have to secure the endpoint. Now, why? Why is that? Well, the fact of the matter is that attackers are coming after people. They're coming after employees. They're coming after people, and they're primarily fooling people. And they're fooling people by getting them to click on links and open attachments, but also fooling people into a number of different ways. And I can go into a lot of them, but let's save some time to get the person to do the mistake that allows the attacker a way in. Essentially what they're doing is getting the person to install the malware for them. Now the attacker can reach into the system, have command and control, and start moving around, right? And so what happens is if you have endpoint security, that means that you're securing the endpoint, the phone, the tablet, the computer, the thumb drive, anything that's closest to the person who will make the mistake. That endpoint becomes a sensor, and it uses what we call zero trust in the industry. Zero trust means that nothing works unless you've already trusted it. In the old days, it was called whitelisting, but now there's like complex AI that does that work for you. It's like the best. Let me put it this way. It's like the best new club on the Hollywood strip, and nobody gets in. They're all lined up. They all look beautiful. They're the best dressed, best looking people, and none of them are getting in because they're not on the list. And there's this big nasty bouncer there with a list. And if you're not on the list, you don't get in. And he makes those decisions. That's your endpoint. Now, if you're walking in, if I'm trying to get in and I walk in with Ryan Phillippe, who played me in the movie Breach, well, then I get a chance. Yeah. But otherwise, I'm not getting in. None of us are getting in. That's the best thing you can do. Personally, you have to have a good cybersecurity suite. You can't just, for example, I have a Mac. You can't just say, hey, Macs don't get infected. They do. You have to go out there and pay the money to get a subscription to one of the top tier cybersecurity companies that do personal cybersecurity for a single machine. And there are a number of them out there. Just look for the top tier and of course, the ones that work best for your system.
Thank you. Okay, so the next question goes back to the Robert Hansen incident. Mm-hmm. Alan asks, how do you think he was targeted by the Russians, or did he reach out to them first?
So how was he targeted? So he wasn't. So Hansen was what we call in the business a volunteer. Yeah, that's right. That's what we call. So he volunteered his services to the Russians. Here's how he did it. And by the way, if I don't answer any of your questions and you want to hear more about the story or learn everything you need to know about cybersecurity, you can grab my book and that will complete anything I missed, right? Hansen sent a letter to a known intelligence officer at the Russian consulate. And the known intelligence officer, what we mean by that is the job of the FBI is to figure out who in embassies and consulates who come over here under diplomatic protection. We sort the spies from the diplomats. We sort the spies from the people who are actually doing administrative diplomacy. And what every single country on earth does, including the US, is we seed all of our spies into diplomacies. That way, if they get caught, they have diplomatic immunity and they just get sent home and their career ends. So we had to figure out who the spies were and who weren't. And the spies, their job was to make sure we didn't know they were spies. So in his first act of volunteering, he sent a letter to a spy saying, hey, the FBI knows you're a spy. And I want you to take this to the head of the spies over in the embassy, right? So one person is in charge of all the spies. And I want to spy for you. I want to keep you in place, and you'll be my point of contact. You're never going to know who I am, but I'm going to give you secrets, and you're going to give me money, and here's how it's going to go. And they never really pried too hard into who he was, because he was the goose who was laying the golden eggs. And for 22 years, he called every shot. He told them where he was going to leave drops. He told them where the signals, where he would put a piece of tape to let them know that he just loaded that drop at the bridge would be. The intelligence officer would come out of the embassy on Tunlaw Road in Washington, D.C., and he'd spend 8 hours doing really boring stuff, get lunch, go shopping, walk through parks, just to see if somebody like me was following him. And when he felt completely clean, he'd go pull that drop out from under the bridge, and then he'd go back to the embassy. It would go in a diplomatic pouch, all those secrets, and get flown to Moscow, where it would be looked at by Russian intelligence there. So Hansen volunteered his services. That's how bad of a spy he was. He was never even recruited.
Excellent. Matthew is asking, what do you believe or will be the two biggest threats to our IT systems in the next 5 years? And how do we prepare or prevent this or make it more difficult to be attacked by these threats?
Yeah, I think we're still seeing the threat that concerns me the most. It is ransomware or ransomware vector. So ransomware is very devastating, and it can be a number of things. Ransomware can be basic. I lock you up, and when you're locked, you pay me Bitcoin. They'll even help you figure out. You can actually, I've seen ransomware vectors where you get to chat with your attackers. They open up like a Slack-like chat app on your computer that they've installed for you, because now they control your computer. And they'll talk to you to explain how you open up a Bitcoin wallet and get your cryptocurrency into it to pay them. And they give you your decryption key, and now you've got your data back, except for they usually leave malware behind, so you can be a repeat customer. That's one vector. We've also seen malware attacks, and I think the future of these, ransomware attacks, the future of these attacks are where they quietly collect in large number of systems, they lurk for a long time and bring everything down at once. And I think that is the future of damaging attacks. What they also do is they reach out to backups and they change data. And that scares me the most, because when you change data, you get locked by ransomware and you think that you've solved the problem by restoring your backup, but they've changed that data. You've just really altered, or you've created disinformation, or you can create a lot of disruption. Imagine if they got into the banking sector and did that, and suddenly everybody's account when they restored was different. That would cause huge amounts of chaos. So I think that right now is one of the number one things that concerns me, those sort of quiet espionage kind of attacks that change data in a way that creates massive more confusion than if they just destroyed or locked the data out.
All right, Jessica Snow asked a great question. I'm really eager to hear your answer to this one. Any suggestions on getting buy-in from decision makers on making security changes like MFA or something that is less convenient?
Right, so getting buy-in. So look, my keynote is all about getting buy-in, right? It's all about the things that can go wrong. And that if you just tell people that 23%, right? That's 1/4. That's almost 1/4 of people are going to click on those damaging email links. That's perfect buy-in, because it all becomes about cost. The average cost, right? And this is a couple of years ago data, but they compile them a few years in arrears. The average cost of a cyber attack, a successful cyber attack against an organization, is $3.62 million. Because you need to go through and you need to find out how it happened, and you need to remediate it, and you need to install the cybersecurity to protect it from happening again. That's a lot of money. The cost of installing two-factor authentication, just literally clicking a button and turning it on with whatever you use, is negligible. It's a little bit of training, and people grumble a bit because now they have to look at their phones and get a text or go into an app to log in, but it protects you from so many problems. It's kind of like in the old days when we were worried about all the viruses that would come around. Remember that, the good old days? And you would get a virus scanner on your computer that would protect you from that. Everybody had to do it. Everyone had to adopt it, and it stopped that problem. Now it's malware, right? If you don't do it, you're doomed. It's that simple. So the conversation is about talking about, I like to give one example. My favorite is that 2016 spear phishing attack on the election. I mean, because that really puts it in perspective. What I like to say is, imagine that your organization is spear phished and now they have 30,000 of your emails, and every journalist on earth is going through all of your emails from your Gmail account. How scary is that for an executive or someone who's making a decision? Because that's what's going to happen. All of their emails could be out there for the world to see. And that's something that no one wants to happen. So if it's just a matter of doing a few small, simple things to protect yourself, the discussion is a no-brainer. And of course, the cost is way more than you're ever going to see.
Thank you. So in your talk, you spoke about the Russian interference in the 2016 election, and you touched on the 2020, and you were less than a dozen days away from election day. How concerned should we be about interference that is currently happening in social media? And along with that, is there any way that a foreign government can launch a cyber attack that would actually change votes?
Yeah. So a couple things. I just did this huge panel about this. So, hey, I'm all ready to talk about it. No, let's start with the good news. I don't believe that a foreign government could launch an attack that would change enough votes to change the outcome of the election. It's very, very difficult. Like, for example, Russia did it to Ukraine. And they messed around in the German politics, and in France, they went after Macron, they went after Merkel. But it's very difficult here because we do not have a federal election system. We have a state-run and actually a locality-run election system. So what happens is every little county and municipal locality runs its own election and then tabulates the votes up, and they go up and up and up, and finally are handed to the federal government. So you would have to get a critical mass of a lot of little tiny election places in order to change the votes. That cyber attack would often require direct access to the machines. Now, is it possible? Yes, but that would be like the greatest spy operation ever, and there's just not enough manpower for that. It's not going to be able to happen from overseas. That would be very difficult. Could they go into a swing state and maybe change votes in one really critical electorate? That's possible. Could that change the outcome? Maybe, but now we're almost getting into stuff that would make for a great spy novel. Maybe I'll have to think about it for my next book. It's become more and more difficult as elections have gotten a little bit better at cybersecurity. What concerns me more is the hearts and the minds, right? So the disinformation campaigns are what have been very successful for the last number of years. There were massive disinformation campaigns in 2016. We're seeing it again today. And we saw it in 2018 during the midterms. The idea that a vote could be changed is what they want to promote. That's what they did in 2016, made Americans think that their vote could be changed or that there would be an attack and their vote would be published. Now, a lot of people don't like either candidate, and they're holding their nose and voting for one. You've heard that for a long time. It was the same in 2016, it's the same now. And if people are afraid that someone could know who they voted for and that they're not going to be allowed to go to Christmas dinner with their family, then they might not vote. And so that's a little bit more scary to me. And that's what we have to worry about more than anything else.
Eric, thank you so much. We have totally enjoyed your stories and this session today. We appreciate everything that you've done and appreciate you for sharing it with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Felina, and thank you all for having me. It has been my privilege and pleasure. The questions were excellent. You all are obviously very smart, and I appreciate the time to talk a little bit about cybersecurity and to tell a little bit about my spy story.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Okay, bye.
Thank you, Felina. Stay safe.